And when he did that, I was not a happy camper. So it's too bad.
You said he had problems. What kind of problems? I mean, is it the drugs?
I don't know what his problem is, really. I don't know. I haven't thought too much about it.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey, and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years' experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. In a shocking turn of events, Elon Musk and Donald Trump had a bit of a public falling out just last week. Musk took to his own platform, X, formerly known as Twitter, and wrote a couple of posts about President Trump. In one of his posts, Musk referred to Trump's bill as a disgusting abomination. In another, he connected Trump to the Epstein files. He also responded yes to a commenter who suggested impeachment. These are just a couple of examples of things that caused Donald Trump to tell ABC News that Elon Musk has lost his mind. However, this week, there appears to be a bit of a change of heart, as Musk took back to X and wrote, "I regret some of my posts about President Donald Trump last week. They went too far." Now, although he didn't specify which post specifically he was talking about, or what he means by they went too far, also note that he took down the posts, it was enough for Donald Trump to respond to what he said in an interview. But what do their body language, facial expressions, and word choice reveal? Was this just a quick spat that was a little too public, or is the relationship seriously damaged? Let's dive right in.
Kicking off this week is the apex alpha of global politics, President Donald Trump. Mr. President, thank you so much for doing this, our very first podcast. Especially, I know how much you have on your plate. I don't know, how do you juggle it all? You've got wars, you've got big, beautiful
I got lots of war and peace. I have, and I have you. And I heard it was your first. So this is your first. That's an honor to be on your show.
Thank you. So tell us, we're in this room. Why did you choose the library?
Well, it just represents a lot having to do with the White House. Books on the library, books on the White House. I'm very familiar with this building, and I love it. And it's a very special building.
All right, so before we look at the clip of him talking about the conflict with Musk, I wanted to start with, right in the beginning of the interview, to establish a baseline, to see what the mood of the interview is and what his baseline behaviors are, to see if there's a deviation when Elon comes up. I want to start with something that I'm very excited to talk about because it's a great example of something we often cover on the channel. And it's the fact that right in the beginning, from the moment it cuts to him, we see an asymmetric one-sided smile. So notice he's smiling, but it's not this big symmetric smile. It's off to one side like this, and it's held for a while. Now on the channel, we very often talk about the research on the universal emotions. This is a short list of emotions that pretty much everywhere in the world produce more or less the same facial expressions, and all societies can recognize these emotions non-verbally. Now on the channel, we often talk about the fact that only one of those emotions is asymmetric, doesn't look the same on both sides of the face. And that emotion is contempt, the feeling of moral superiority or looking down on something. And it's characterized by a scrunching on one side of the mouth. So sometimes it looks like this, and sometimes it looks like this. And it's very often accompanied with what we call looking askance, which is this kind of side eye, or even a rolling of the eyes. Now, whenever I mention this, without going into too much detail on the research, I get a couple of comments from people saying, now hold on a second, sometimes I smile with one side of my face, or if I'm being silly, or if I'm really thinking about something, I might do different things on two sides of the face. And that's absolutely correct. Contempt is not the only expression or emotion that's asymmetrical. It's the only one on that short list of universal emotions. The reason I'm mentioning this is because I don't want people who watch the channel to go out there and think that anytime you see asymmetry on the mouth, it's gotta be contempt. Contempt is a scrunching on one side of the mouth. So you really gotta see that tension either around the nose or around the lip. It's a scrunch. So in this case, we have a perfect example of something that is asymmetric, that involves the mouth, but is not necessarily contempt. Right in the beginning, we see President Trump sitting there with a smile on one side of the face. But it's just an elevated, closed-lip smile. We're not really seeing a scrunch. You'll also notice that he's holding it for quite some time as he's listening to her. Now, contempt can be held, but in most cases, it's a pretty quick flash that happens just as the person is mentioning the thing that they feel contemptuous towards. So as they're talking, you either see a quick flash like that, or you might see them hold it for a couple of seconds, but then it goes away. But it looks more unpleasant. There's more of that tightness, which here we're not really seeing. In fact, I actually think he's quite pleased with this interview and the way that it started, because she's very complimentary to him. Look at the way she introduced him. She calls him the apex alpha of global politics. And she goes on in the interview to be very complimentary and very grateful to be there interviewing him. Now, this is someone who's doing her job right. I don't know if she approaches every interview like this or if it's specific to him, but we all know that Donald Trump has quite the ego on him. And we've seen interviewers who come in with a confrontational mood to try to get that gotcha moment out of him. And that's something that could really shut someone down very fast. So we know from studying the psychology of interviews and interrogations that this is the right way to approach an interview, regardless of your feelings towards the subject. When you're open and grateful and kind, you get more openness and more answers. And right in the beginning, we see the result of the way she opened this up, because in greeting her, he says, it's an honor to be on your show. So she set up a friendly conversation here, which in most cases will get more positive results. Okay, speaking of baseline, you'll notice he's sitting there, leaning forward, speaking in a rather calm tone, and you'll notice that his hands are in a lowered steeple. So this is called a steeple, when the fingers come together like this. And in a lot of cases, in boardrooms or in meetings or in the corporate world, you'll see the steeple up here. And this signifies confidence and authority. Usually it's the person with power or control in the room who's sitting like this. It's a confident posture. In their book, The Definitive Book of Body Language, best-selling authors Barbara and Alan Pease talk about something called the low steeple. So it's a steeple, but lower down, by the waist or even lower, like he's got it over here. And this is usually more of a listening steeple. So it still has that same confidence, that same authority, but it's a little bit more muted. So that's what we're seeing here. He's sitting there, nothing's crossed, nothing's too tense. He's listening to her. There's a calmness there. And we have this steeple that signifies a muted confidence. Another thing that I want you to notice that's going to be very important in today's discussion is right when he says, I'm very familiar with this building and I love it. Right after he says, I love it, we see a very subtle chin jutting out as he inhales. So as he's going, and I love it, we see kind of like that. Take a look.
I'm very familiar with this building and I love it. And I love it. And I love it.
So as he inhales, the chin just quickly juts out. So put a pin in that, because we're going to talk about it quite a bit in a few minutes, but I want you to remember that it happened right in the beginning when he was comfortably just talking about the room that they're in. Very important. Okay, now we're going to look at the segment where he talks about Elon Musk and what happened and how he feels towards it. And what's going to change in his behavior, in his facial expressions, his body language, and very importantly, what words is he choosing to talk about the situation. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical psychology content.
And what happened with Elon? Is there anything that you can do to forgive him? Could you see that happening?
Well, I have no hard feelings. I was really surprised that happened. He went after a bill that's phenomenal. It's the best thing we've ever signed in this country, and that's phase one. Phase two, phase three. All of a sudden, it all comes together. It's coming together so well. And when he did that, I was not a happy camper. So it's too bad.
You said he had problems. What kind of problems? I mean, is it the drugs?
I don't know what his problem is, really. I don't know. I haven't thought too much about him in the last little while, but the bill is so good. When he went after the bill, this bill is going to turn around this country so fast your head will spin. It's good for everyone. It's also a tax cut. It's a massive tax cut. It's an extension of debt, which we need. We have to get that. And then we're going to start paying off debt at record levels. It's tariffs on certain people. It's, by the way, no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security.
All your promises.
Yeah. And I mean, it's no tax on overtime. If a worker works overtime, there's no tax. That's going to be a great stimulant for the country.
Okay, so that's part one of him talking about the conflict with Elon. And there's a lot going on, starting with the way the question was asked. So she said, is there anything you can do to forgive him? Not is there anything you could do to reconcile? Is there anything you could do to forgive each other? You could forgive him. So even in the way that she's asking the question, she's making it seem like Elon was out of line. He was wrong for what he did. Can you forgive him for the wrong that he did? Now let's look at his answer both verbally and non-verbally. So the first thing that he says to, is there anything you could do to forgive him is, look, I have no hard feelings. And that's a very interesting answer for me, because anytime in an interrogation or in an interview, when we ask a question, we look at the response and go, Does that answer my question, and does it answer my entire question? And in this case, it kind of does, but it also makes me ask a lot more questions, right? Because he's saying, I have no hard feelings. Okay, does that mean yes, you forgive him? No, you don't forgive him? Or there's nothing to forgive because you don't have hard feelings? But most importantly, there's this really big signal in the back of our mind going, why don't you have any hard feelings? Because he goes on to say, I was surprised, and we're going to talk about some of this, the rest of the response, but really, that's all you were? Just surprised? He called your bill a disgusting abomination, this bill that's so important to you. He connected you to the Epstein files, which is another really, really negative thing to say about someone. So why don't you have hard feelings? I would expect someone to have hard feelings about some of the things that were said. So I'm going to have this thing in the back of my mind moving forward going, okay, you've said you have no hard feelings, but does that match the rest of what I'm seeing and hearing in the rest of this response? Now, the next thing that he says isn't an explanation as to why he doesn't have hard feelings. It's an elaboration on what he does have, which is surprise. And if we compare it to when he was talking about the room that they're in, the library, or he's about to talk about the bill, those times, he just was talking with a certain flow. It was uninterrupted. In this case, he's looking off to the distance, looking for his words. As he stammers a little bit, I was really surprised. As he looks at her and he head tilts, as he says surprised. So he hesitates verbally. There's a pause, and then that happened. And he emphasizes the second that happened.
I was really surprised that happened.
So a lot to unpack here. First, we have that verbal leak combined with that hesitation. So verbal leak meaning anything like that. Now, again, remember baseline. There are a lot of people who naturally speak this way with a lot of ums and ahs. In this interview, he's not doing a lot of that, but especially combined with that pause of hesitation, with that bit of a stammering, I was, with him looking off to the side, searching for those words, with him emphasizing that happened, not coming up with a more specific or better term than that. So we're seeing a lot of this hesitation to try to use the right words to talk about the situation. And the nonverbal communication really supports that he's trying to choose his words carefully and not get too worked up about this. So the first hint we see there is he's looking for his words and he says, I was really surprised. And as he says surprised, he looks at her with a head tilt. And this is something, the head tilt, that we see very commonly in exchanges of sympathy. Whether we're giving someone sympathy, like, oh, you poor thing, or requesting sympathy in a conversation. Now, this isn't the only place that we see the head tilt commonly. We also see it often with curiosity or skepticism. So when we're skeptical or curious about something, that head tilt is very common, but often accompanied with more things happening on the face. Where we don't see a head tilt is in stressful or defensive interactions, because when we're defensive, we protect the vital parts of the body, the neck being one of them. So exposing the neck like this is very vulnerable. The research on this is also really fascinating because it shows that the reason we might tilt our heads in sympathetic or soft exchanges is because subconsciously we know that it feels less like a glare. Like if I'm talking to you and my head is straight up and I'm looking at you, this might feel like a more direct glare, whereas if I tilt a little bit and my eyes are uneven, it feels a little bit less intense. But whatever the case may be, in this instance, as he looks at her and goes, I was really surprised, that definitely looks very consistent with a request for sympathy. Now, there's something else that happens that's really interesting right after the head tilt. So he's looking for his words, I was really surprised. Now he looks off again to continue looking for his words, but as he hesitates, just before that hesitation, just before that we see a quick lip lick. Now, their camera cuts, their editing cuts right at that moment and goes to a different angle. So it's not long enough for me to see exactly what kind of a lip lick it is, but there is a lip licking in that moment. Now, the reason I say what kind of lip lick is because there are two types of lip licks that we could see in moments where the cognitive load is increased or when someone's getting stressed out about something. The first one is just a lip lick. The tongue comes out and licks the lips. And this is commonly associated to stress because when we're stressed, the mouth dries out and this corrects that. It could also be a grooming gesture, which is anything that we do to fix our appearance, and licking the lips brings more color to the lips, so it could signal a moment of self-awareness. But the second type looks different from that. It's a pushing out or an expelling of the tongue that looks like this. It's a little more forced, and that's called a tongue jut and is associated with a negative feeling or emotion that we're trying to expel. We even see this in babies. It's there from when we are babies and you're fed something that you don't like, and you're trying to get rid of this bad taste in your mouth. But as we age, it almost becomes metaphorical, where sometimes we're trying to expel more of a thought rather than a physical sensation. In this instance, it was very difficult to see exactly which one it was because they cut as it was happening and they punched in. So I can't tell you if it's more of a tongue jut or a lip lick. What I can tell you is always remember to keep in mind baseline and clusters. Very important, especially for something like lip licking. Because if someone's just talking and there's nothing else going on with their behaviors and they just lick their lips, I may not even notice it. But in this case, it's not the only thing that's happening. So I'm on high alert looking for more things to contribute to this cluster. So we have this looking around, searching for his words. We have this hesitation. We have this looking for some sympathy. We have this emphasis on the that, which we're going to talk about in a second. So there's a lot of other things going on, and the licking of the lips contributes to that. And again, remember baseline. Some people, as they talk, lick their lips a lot. They might be having a conversation with dry lips. But in this conversation, he goes full stretches without licking his lips at all. So again, baseline and clusters. So after this hesitation, this request for sympathy, this little spike in stress, he says, I was surprised that happened. And he emphasizes the that with this little forward nod, that happened.
I was really surprised that happened.
That is a very interesting word choice. And a situation like this denotes a psychological distancing, which is when we use words to soften or distance from something that's emotionally more loaded. So if we're talking about someone, like this case, and we say something like, I can't believe he's being like that. The that is because we don't want to use more emotionally heavy words. So in this case, he's saying, I'm surprised that happened. Well, what happened? What do you mean by that? Do you mean that he was being an a-hole? Do you mean that he was spreading some lies? Do you mean that betrayal happened? Like he betrayed the relationship that you guys had in some way? So what's the that? He immediately goes on to explain part of the that, because he says, he went after a bill that, and he's going to start talking about the bill, but that's not the whole that. That's not the thing that happened. It's one of the things. It's a component of the that. But what is this distancing from? What is the that? Next, he goes on to do something that's quite common for him, where he speaks very positively about this bill and his work. And this is called a convincing statement or resume statement. And this is whenever we say things to lift ourselves up. And in interrogations and interviews, we see it very commonly with this psychological distancing, these clusters of stress, because it's like the person almost took a little bit of a hit, and so they speak positively about themselves to balance that out. But for Donald Trump, this is baseline. He's very often talking very positively about himself and the work that he's doing. Moving on, he says, when he did that, again, that, I wasn't a happy camper, so it's too bad. And after camper and too bad, we again see that chin jut. So he goes, I wasn't a happy camper. And we see that chin, as he's looking at her, kind of pop forward. So it's too bad. And he reemphasizes, and again, that chin comes forward as he's looking at her. So again, put a pin in that, because we're going to see it again a third time, and I want to talk about all of it then. But notice again, as he's saying this, at the end of both those sentences, he's looking at her, that chin juts out. But the thing that got me really curious with this answer is he's saying, when he did that, I wasn't a happy camper, so it's too bad. And the moment he said that, I went right back to what he said at the beginning of this question, because he said, when she asked if he would forgive Elon, he said, I have no hard feelings. Okay, so if at this point in time, right now, you have no hard feelings, but a week ago, you were not a happy camper, what's the reconciliation? What happened? Because you're telling us you're feeling one way, but just a week ago you felt another way, but I'm not really getting a shift, a difference. Like what happened to change that if truly right now you have no hard feelings? Because in saying that it's too bad and some other things that he's about to say, I kind of have a feeling that maybe you do still have a little bit of hard feeling. A huge example as to why I think there might still be some hard feelings is the very next question that she asks. Really pay attention to the word choice. Look at it again.
You said he had problems. What kind of problems? I mean, is it the drugs?
I don't know what his problem is, really. I don't know. I haven't thought too much about it.
Verb tense is something that we pay a lot of attention to in interrogation and in interviews because they give you a lot of clues about what happened and what is happening. So her question is, you said he had a lot of problems. What kind of problems? So she's saying that's what you said, he had problems. Back when you guys were bickering, that's something that you said. What did you mean? But look at what he says. He shifts the verb tense. He says, I don't know what his problem is. And there's two small shifts there. One, it's not problems that he's having. It's more like, I don't know what his problem is. Like, what's this guy's problem? And what it is, like now, what's this guy's problem? I don't know what it is. So this is a hint that there's still a problem now. Then he adds to that, I haven't thought about him much in a while, with a bit of a throwaway snicker, like he hasn't occupied my thoughts, and goes back to talking about the bill. So we have this, I don't know what his problem is. I haven't thought much about him with this dismissive thing. Then let's go right back to talking about this bill that I'm very happy with. So it's hard for me to accept how we went from, I wasn't a happy camper, I don't know what his problem is, I haven't thought much about him, for me to go from that to him saying, I don't have any hard feelings, when it doesn't seem consistent with what I'm getting in this moment and what I'm going to continue to get.
No, I think your bill is great. And
he just didn't
I think
get that.
He feels very badly that he said that, actually.
And maybe it was something else. I mean, he had the fight with Scott Besson outside your office.
Yeah, well, they had not a fist fight, people, but I guess they had a little bit of a shouting match. But that's
Did you hear it?
That's typical. I heard a little bit. That's sort of typical about,
Yeah,
that happens.
You were very kind to him. I saw you together, and I think he treated you a bit like a father. And
I was disappointed.
Yeah.
In him, but it is what it is. That happens. Things like that happen. I don't blame him for anything. That I was a little disappointed.
Could you reconcile?
Say it?
Could you reconcile with him? Do you think? Could you forgive him?
I guess I could, but we have to straighten out the country.
Yeah.
And my sole function now is getting this country back to a level higher than it's ever been. And I think we can do that. I think we're going to do it easily.
Okay, so on this one, we start with, I think, and he emphasizes think again with that forward motion, I think that he feels very badly that he said that, actually. And again, that chin jut right at the end. So first, let's start with, I think that he feels very badly. So what this is telling me, especially because I know President Trump's baseline, is that he hasn't had, or it's likely that he hasn't had a conversation yet at this point with Elon since Elon's apology. Because if he had, it's very typical of him to say, oh, we had a conversation, we talked earlier today, nice guy, we've been friends for a long time, and he said this, and he said, listen, I'm sorry, da, 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 da. He would really go into that. He would really talk about specifically what was said. But he's saying, I think that he feels badly. So what he's saying here is that he probably just saw the same thing we saw. He saw that post on X. He saw that the former post came down. So he's assuming, he thinks that Elon feels badly. But let's talk about this chin jut. And I think it's really important that we noted from the very beginning that it was happening, because if I saw it in this moment, while he's talking about Elon, the way we saw it here and the way we saw it earlier, twice in one sentence, if it wasn't baseline for him, it would have a very important meaning. So let's talk about what that meaning is and what changes because it's baseline for him to do that with the chin. So if you're talking to someone who doesn't usually do this, chin jut when they're talking to you, and it's not something I very commonly see as part of someone's baseline. So assuming it's not, and you're talking to them and they're looking at you, and all of a sudden you see this chin come forward, whether it's just that jaw or the whole head coming forward like this, but the chin extends towards you, this is a very good indication of pre-aggression. When someone's upset about something, angered by something, or there's a subconscious confrontation in their head, we tend to see that chin come forward. We even see it very often before someone fights, when they're kind of talking, going at each other, you see this kind of chin going forward. It's pre-confrontation. Now, in the case of Donald Trump, it doesn't happen randomly. It happens often, but it's not random. It's very common at the end of his sentences, and we also see it often when he's thinking about things. So he might be looking to the side, thinking about something, we kind of see that. We kind of see it go to the side a little bit. So we see this jaw activity very consistently with ending a sentence or when he's in thought. And it's funny because in the research, there are a lot of parallels between the things that we see on the face when someone's angry and when someone's in deep thought or focused on something. One of the muscles, well, two of the muscles technically, that are very active both with anger and with deep thought is the corrugator supercilii, which is right here, right in the middle of the eyebrows here, and that's what pulls them down like this. So it's common with anger, and it's very common with deep thought or focus as well. And another place where we see a lot of tension is around the mouth, both with anger, with that pressed lips, and with focus. Very often we might see somebody going like this or like this. a lot of stuff with the lips. The one part of the face that you could focus on to distinguish anger from deep thought in the real world is the eyes. Even if in both cases the blink rate does drop, both with anger we blink less, and with focus they look different. With focus we tend to shoot the eyes around quite a bit, or look off into the distance while we're focusing on something. We might even squint a little. Even if we're not blinking as much, there might be a bit of a squint. With anger, it's open. There's that glare. So when that, especially that upper eyelid, when that's open, that's unmistakable. Now, I've always been fascinated by this overlap. The fact that anger behaviorally looks a lot like deep thought. And there are a lot of great theories out there that explain why they look the same. One of them that I really like is that anger in and of itself is focus, because you're assessing what to do, right? That's why the eyes open up. You're trying to take in as much information as you can to know how to react. It's also why the eyebrows come down, because there might be a threat, so they're trying to block or protect the eyes. This is why this happens. The reason the mouth closes or presses is because usually when we do that, we're holding something in. So in a moment of assessment, we might be trying to, hold it in, try to figure out what's going on. So it might be related to the fact that they come from the same part of the brain, because in both cases, the emotions are involved, but also so is critical thinking to try to figure out what to do. So again, remember the importance of clusters, especially in a case like this where two things look very similar. So if it's just the brows, it could be either one. Look for more clues. If it's just that jaw kind of moving, forward like this or to the side, it could again be either one. Look for more clues. So in this particular case, if this was a normal conversation with someone who doesn't do this as a baseline, and they're looking at me like this with a rather serious look, and they're talking about something where I'm seeing these spikes of stress, and then I see that chin jut coming forward, I would almost certainly associate that to some kind of negative feeling. The thing with Donald Trump is we saw from the very beginning of this interview that right at the end of the sentence, it happens often. So right at the end, we see that little bit of a jut. There's a very, very slight difference. And it's the fact that the other times when we saw it, in the beginning when he was smiling, it came with this inhale right at the end, like this kind of thing. As he was breathing in, and we heard that breath like this. And it's very commonly like that.
And I love it.
In this case, when he was talking about Elon, he was talking about these feelings, whether it's disappointment or, how he feels that Elon really regrets what he said. Right at the end, again, it was at the end, so there is overlap there, but it's just that jaw that's coming forward, and he's kind of holding it for a little bit more.
And when he did that, I was not a happy camper. So it's too bad.
You said he had problems. What kind of problems? I mean, is it the drug?
So it is a little different, and it is happening at a time where I could see him having some negative feelings, but I don't think it's different enough for me to give it that much importance. So I think the really big takeaway here is that although in this case, it could be the baseline. In other cases, if it's not part of someone's baseline and you see that, they're talking about something and you see that happen, and it's not a moment where you're feeling that it's deep thought, that could be a resentment or a negative feeling towards something, because it would look pretty much exactly like that. And it could still be that here, but because it is baseline, I'm not going to be that certain about that read. Okay, let's go right to the end, because a lot of great stuff there as well. He says, it is what it is, with a shoulder shrug. And I don't blame him for anything. And as he says blame, we see the eyebrows go up and flash, which is interesting because he's not someone who speaks a lot with those eyebrows. For a lot of people, talking with the eyebrows is common. It's baseline. I'm one of those people, very expressive with the eyebrows. But for him, it's not that common. So it really stood out when he said, I don't blame him for anything with those eyebrows going up and down. So let's start with the shoulder shrug when he says it is what it is. So the research on shrugging, any kind of shrugging, whether it's the shoulders and the hands, the eyebrows, sometimes it even comes with a head tilt or a mouth shrug like this. Any type of shrugging, when you see it in the real world, denotes a disengagement. So I don't blank, I don't something. I don't know, I don't care, I don't want to do that. I don't have anything to add to that is very common as well. But in this case, given that what he's saying, it is what it is, it looks like what's called a shrug of affect. Like I can't really do anything about this. I don't really have control over this, or I don't really care about this. So it's a disconnect from the emotion of it. And it is what it is. That's just what the situation is. Then he goes on to say, I don't blame him for anything. And the eyebrows go up. Now, the eyebrows are a part of the body that I pay a lot of attention to because there's a lot of great research and it's a very reliable tell in the real world. When you see those eyebrows go up conversationally, it's typically one of three things. Either emphasis, we're emphasizing something, either some kind of social connection, like a greeting or socially connecting in a conversation, or surprise, when we're surprised by something. In all of these cases, however, it comes down to one thing: we're giving importance to something, whether it's an idea, a person, or an event, right? With that eyebrow, we're saying something, it's the exclamation point of the face. Something's happening here. So in this case, when he's saying, I don't blame him for anything, I think it is emphasis on the word blame, because that's when it's happening. And I think what is meant here subconsciously is, I might not be a happy camper, I might be irritated, I might be surprised, I might be a lot of things, but I don't blame him. Like maybe a part of him understands what happened. Maybe he knows that this conflict merited some kind of Elon acting out, so he might have certain feelings towards it, but he doesn't necessarily blame him. And this brought me to another really big question mark. Her question to him was about how he feels towards the whole Elon thing. Unless they cut it out, she wasn't specific. She didn't say, what are your thoughts on what he said about the bill? But all he talked about is the bill. He didn't address any of the other stuff. So it's kind of interesting to see where his priorities fall. Why is that the only thing that he had to comment on? Why isn't he outraged that Elon suggested there's a connection between him and Epstein? Why isn't he outraged that somebody said he should be impeached and Elon said yes to that? Now, unfortunately, all I have are questions. And to try to answer these questions myself is presumptuous, and that's called confirmation bias. In an interview room, this kind of thing would just raise a red flag and make me go, oh my God, you have to ask some questions here. Because he really focused on this one thing, and now he's telling me that he doesn't blame him. Okay, so wait, why doesn't he blame him? And why is this the focus? Because it could really be two things that are pretty much complete opposites. On the one hand, it could be that there's some validity to what was said about the Epstein files, like maybe his name will come up to some capacity in there, so he doesn't want to talk about that. He wants to focus on the thing that he can defend, which is this bill that he really believes in. That's one option. And then on the other hand, it's possible that he feels the Epstein and the impeachment thing are so ridiculous that it's not even worth his time, but there's some validity to criticizing this bill, so that's why he's spending a lot of time defending the bill. So literally polar opposites. And without asking those questions and digging deeper, because there's some behavioral stuff going on that suggests there's a little bit more here, we can't get that answer, and to try to guess which one it is confirmation bias. But the most interesting thing that happened is right at the end, because she ends by asking the same question that she did in the beginning, right? She started by saying, is there anything you could do to forgive him? To which he said, I have no hard feelings. But now at the end, she asks it again. Could you forgive him? And this time he gives a different answer. He says, I guess I could.
Could you reconcile with him, do you think? Could you forgive him?
I guess I could, but we have to straighten out the country.
Yeah.
Which is very different from, I have no hard feelings. In this case, I guess I could is almost the opposite of that. Like, I'm not sure, I guess I could, I haven't really thought about it, but it's certainly not leaning more towards I have no hard feelings. It's I guess I could, but now he redirects to say, we have to strengthen this country. And my sole function now is getting this country back to a level higher than it's ever been, which first of all doesn't make sense. You can't go back to something that's never happened. If it's higher than it's ever been, you can't go back to it. But that, let's just attribute that to a fumble in the sentence. But yeah, it's interesting how he goes, I guess I could, but here's my focus. Here's what's really important, not forgiving him. Okay, to really wrap this thing up, outside of this interview, I want to show you two other clips really quick because it's going to help me form my conclusion as to what his feelings are towards the whole situation. One of them was actually from a little bit earlier. This was on June 9th at a press conference. He was asked a question about the Elon situation and said this.
Yeah.
Speak to him on the phone anytime soon? I know some.
Which one?
On Elon Musk. Do you plan to speak to him on the phone anytime soon?
I haven't really thought about it, actually. I would imagine he wants to speak to me. I would think that. If I were him, I'd want to speak to me, and maybe he's already called. You'd have to ask him whether or not he's already called. But I'd have no problem with it.
If he calls you, pick up and speak to him?
Well, I don't want to say that, but I would imagine he'd want to talk to me.
Okay, I don't want to spend too much time analyzing this because that could be an entirely different video in and of itself. So you can apply a lot of what we talked about on the channel to look at this. But I'm going to sum it up to this. If an alien came from a separate planet and asked me, I don't understand the concept of having hard feelings. give me an example of someone who has hard feelings, this is the video I would send them. I'd be like, look, this is a perfect example of that. So we could see it's like there's some pettiness there. Like we're seeing him like, oh, you ask him if he called me. I'm not going to call him. Ask him if he called me. And then at the end, it's a little low in the volume, but the reporter asks a follow-up question where he goes, if he called, would you pick up and speak to him? And he says, well, I don't want to say that, but I would imagine he wants to talk to me. So yeah, this is very inconsistent with him saying that I don't have hard feelings. Now, granted, the I have no hard feelings came after this. So maybe something happened between this and that caused that he has no more hard feelings at that point. But that would require a bit more of an explanation as to what happened to get us there. Because at some point you did have hard feelings and now you're saying you don't. And then later in that interview, it's not as confident. And the last clip I want you to look at for your consideration is the most recent one. So this happened just a couple of hours before I'm filming this, and it's not by Trump himself, it's by his press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, and she said this when asked about his feelings towards Elon.
About Elon Musk, he issued an apology this morning. Has the president accepted the apology, or does he think it's too little too late?
The president acknowledged the statement that Elon put out this morning, and he is appreciative of it, and we are continuing to focus on the business of the American people.
So the question is, has the president accepted the apology, or does he think it's too little too late? And what she does is cleverly, she redefines the question. She changes the words and says he's acknowledged it and he's appreciative of it. But that doesn't strictly answer the question, has he accepted the apology? It's basically saying he acknowledged it. He knows it's there. He knows it exists. And he appreciates that he exists. But she's not speaking to the response. She says that, then immediately switches over to saying we're continuing to focus on the business of the American people. So there are a lot of terms for this. Some interrogators call it just a non-answer. Some call it a redirect. In my line of work, we call it verbal misdirection. So when I'm trying to use my words to get your attention somewhere else, for those of you who follow the work of the great Greg Hartley, you know that he calls this chaff and redirect. So you throw something at it and then you kind of redirect to go a different way. Whatever you want to call it though, that's what's happening here. And it certainly doesn't line up with him saying that he doesn't have any hard feelings. So if we put this all together, we have this answer where he says he doesn't have any hard feelings, but then we see him trying to choose his words. We see him saying that he was disappointed. We see him saying that he wasn't a happy camper. We still see signs of disapproval or discomfort around the topic. We see another interview where we certainly see some hard feelings, where he's saying he wouldn't say he would answer the phone call and talk to him, but he imagines that Elon wants to talk to him. So we're seeing some of that there. We're not really seeing how we went from this to not having any hard feelings. And then we have his press secretary saying that he acknowledged the statement, but we're focusing on this other thing right now. So never really answering as to whether or not he accepted the apology. So what is my conclusion on this? I don't believe that he doesn't have hard feelings. I think that there's a possibility where they'll move on from this, depending on how it moves forward, where they will be able to focus on the American people. And if their goals align on that, they'll be able to move on from it. But given the ego that we've seen on Donald Trump and the ego we've seen on Elon Musk, these are two big egos, I don't imagine that Donald Trump will ever forget this betrayal, because they were very close and he went on social media and said some pretty intense things that I don't imagine Donald Trump is ever going to be 100% okay with. In other words, even if there's a reconciliation, even if he does accept the apology, I don't think he'll ever go back to fully trusting him, knowing that this kind of thing happened. Especially because some of the things that he said is not something that you can apologize for effectively. For example, saying yes, he should be impeached, you can apologize for that. It was the heat of the moment, I don't really believe that. But he called his bill a disgusting abomination. That's something that has thought behind it. You read it, you have a feeling towards it, and you express that. So even if you can apologize for having said that, you can't really completely erase the fact that those words were said. So to Trump, there's the knowledge that at a fundamental level, there might be some disagreements about this bill. There's also the fact that Elon never specifically said what he regrets. He said he regrets posting and that they went too far, but it's unclear whether he means that he doesn't actually believe those things or if he does believe them, but he just shouldn't have said them. That's the thing that's going too far. But let me know in the comments what you think. Do you believe that there's a world in which there could be a genuine apology from Elon Musk that's so effective that Trump would actually reconcile everything and go right back to normal like none of this happened? Or do you believe, like that reporter said, that it's too little too late, the damage is done, and that this will have a ripple effect that they can't quite fully fix? Where do you fall on the scale from they will never recover from this, they will never be friendly again, all the way to they'll for sure completely recover from this and they'll go right back to the way things were? Where do you fall in that scale, and why? What is it in the behaviors that make you feel like that's what's going to happen here? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you on the next one.